When the space shuttles were retired, the world collectively stopped taking the idea of an economical, rapidly reusable rocket seriously. To sum it up, everybody went back to what worked: expendable, multi-stage rockets. Because the space shuttle proved to be expensive, unreliable to the point of being dangerous, and seemingly a technological dead end, space launch providers got more than a little complacent. Prices were high, but not as expensive as the space shuttle. With no technological breakthroughs on the horizon, why not charge what the market will bear? I've pointed out some deficiencies in Starship, though not so much in Starship itself as in the project of creating Starship. To be fair, one should take a look at how Starship compares with the Space Shuttle, also known as the Space Transportation System, or STS. You can understand a lot about Starship if you look at it as fulfilling the dream of STS. It really wants to be a space transportation system that makes access to space beyond Earth orbit routine. I feel obligated to make this comparison because I don't want to be taken to criticize the objectives of Starship. My criticism is of how Elon Musk and SpaceX intend to get there. Starship is Elon's idea, make no mistake, and the way that Starship is being developed is Elon's idea. But let's get back to the comparison with space shuttles, or STS. Where the space shuttle required weeks or months of detailed and extremely expensive refurbishment between flights, Starship intends to operate more like an aircraft: land, refuel, and take off again. This comparison is going to sound quite favorable to Starship, in part because we're comparing the actual outcomes of the STS program with the as yet unproven goals of Starship. But let's press on. As I said, I'm critical of the Starship project, not its intentions. STS was never going to get beyond Earth orbit. It wasn't a Mars rocket. That disappointed quite a lot of people. In contrast, Starship, if it achieves its design objectives, is intended to go to Mars. You might remember me criticizing the idea of a Mars colony. That's different than space exploration, which is probably justifiable if only to advance the state of the art. The foolishness of a Mars colony is a different matter. The space shuttle was incredibly expensive. Not only is the fact that it wasn't a Mars rocket disappointing to people interested in advancing space exploration, it soaked up all the money that might have gone to making a Mars rocket. Starship, on the other hand, is intended to provide the cheapest ever kilogram into orbit price, in part because that's required in order to get to Mars. The rapidly iterated development process, which I should note I've been very critical of, is intended to reach this objective of being very inexpensive. I might doubt that the prices Elon talks about will ever be achieved, but the architecture of Starship and the aspects of the project are the way they are to make hitting those price goals at least plausible. There are many worse ideas than Starship. There are various boondoggles that have attracted more or less gullible investors, like spaceplane projects or single-stage to orbit. Keep that in mind when you hear me criticize Starship. There are much more inevitably doomed projects out there. Spaceplanes, in particular, are the wrong direction to go after STS. STS was not a single-stage to orbit rocket. Rather, it was what you could call a 1.5 stage to orbit rocket. And that's what made STS look the way it did: an enormous fuel tank filled with liquid hydrogen, with a spaceplane attached to the side of it, with two great big solid fuel boosters to make up for the fact that even with all of that liquid hydrogen, a spaceplane and its engines by themselves would never make it to orbit. And in most people's eyes, the shuttle has an iconic look, but that look is really the look of a hopeless kludge, the bastard offspring of failed spaceplanes with some missile boosters strapped to it. In comparison, Starship is clean and elegant. Watching a space shuttle land was an impressive sight. The Starship plans to be caught by chopsticks attached to the launch tower, and that seems bizarre by comparison, but the choice is driven by requirements and supported by experience. Landing a rocket on its tail turns out to be reliable and vastly simpler than trying to make a really large winged spacecraft land on a runway. It's an open question if the giant chopsticks will work, or if that proves to be a premature optimization, but it's a better idea than putting wings and landing gear on a starship. So what's the basis for my criticism of Starship, rather than the project to create Starship? It comes down to that it is an all or nothing proposition. For why that is, see my other videos about Starship, and that puts it out in detail. But if it isn't cheap, carrying fuel to orbit to refuel Starship isn't viable. If it can't be caught by the chopsticks, it will take too many starships to fly refueling missions. If it can't be refueled, it won't go beyond Earth orbit. And then we find ourselves back in STS territory. Trying to do all the things that STS was intended to do, and more, is a worthy goal. But as a matter of project planning, avoiding the all or nothing nature of Starship would also probably be a good idea.